Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be going through, just looking at some different lumber within the that I have here in the shop that is less than optimal for making a bow for one reason or another, whether it be maybe questionable species, it could be maybe a little too thin or narrow in terms of width. The thickness could be a problem in terms of getting something of the strength you want. Or in the case of what we're going to be working on with this bow build, is a piece that is a little shorter than optimal. Okay, so it's always best to have a little bit longer bow, especially if this is something that you're new to doing. But in this case, we're going to go with a shorter bow and try to use all the design secrets that we have at our disposal to make it work. So hang out with me for a moment. We're going to go check out what we've got here in the shop that we could build a bow with. Got a couple boards here, each that could make a bow, but each has a, and I'm looking at this piece and this piece here, that have their drawbacks and opportunities. They also have some great quality to them as well. And I'm not sure that I'm really going to be able to adequately show you on camera just how perfect the ring orientation is on these bows. And so I'm going to try and take advantage of the light here and hope that it doesn't mess me up. But on this piece right here, you can see that just at that far end, right down here as we come across it, you can just barely start to see the grain kind of tailing off in one direction. I think that's pretty visible there. But when you turn this on its edge and you take a look at the way that grain is running down the length of that piece of wood, you see that it is stacked up like sheets of paper on one another, right up until that very end, where it just barely starts to curl down a little bit, right? And so if we've got this here, assuming that this is going to be like the tip end or grip, because it's at the end of the board, you got a piece of lumber right here that is probably got the most optimal grain orientation for a board bow that you can come by. And to take advantage of a piece like this, we would, or I would in this instance, given that we are about just over, well, we're about 3 1/4 inches. I don't know if you guys can see the measure there. Yeah, about 3 1/4 inches wide. Now that's at the base. One other problem with this particular piece of wood is when you get to the top end of it, it's only 2 3/4. So we would have to take this and basically bisect this width, and rip it right in half. And then we could Z-splice these two, the resulting two pieces together at the grip, and build one whale of a bow out of this. Because the total length on this piece right here is 40 inches. And so we would lose 4 inches off of each side, making it 36. And we could get a 6-foot length of a stave out of this with a 4-inch splice right here. It'd be 72 inches long. And if we took 2 inches off of each end right here, we'd almost all but eliminate the grain that is kind of running off in the wrong direction down here, which is only minimally at best. And so this right here could turn into, and will eventually, a tremendous bow, and it could be a self bow in the construction. So that's one way to utilize a piece that's got great grain but is limiting in terms of its length, but got the width to accommodate 2 limbs out of that. Now if we're very industrious with this, we could rip it once and then actually rip it again here and laminate that bow with some bamboo if we wanted to, or what have you. But this could go as a self bow. This next piece is going to be the subject of this video build right here. Here's our limiting factor on this one. I think the tape's going to be upside down in the viewfinder here, but it's only 60, it's just barely over 62 inches long. It's about 62.5 inches long. 62 inches is not a lot to work with, especially when the width on it is right at, or even barely at, 1.5 inches wide. The reason I am going to embark on this particular piece is, again, the grain structure on this particular piece of wood is about as well oriented as you get in a piece of wood. If I were to grade the quality of the grain on this piece of wood, I'd give it probably an A or an A minus. And so even at 62 inches, I'm pretty confident that I can get a self bow out of this. Now the thickness on it, I want to say, is just right at about 1/2 inch. All right, it already flexes quite a bit, and it's even got a pretty good setback to it just naturally. But I can already get some bend in it, which means we're probably going to come in with a slightly lighter bow. If I do get it to full draw, my intent is to get this to 28 inches, obviously without breaking it. But I am going to have to utilize every inch of this piece of wood in the employment of bending for a bow. And so we are not going to thicken the grip, at least not by very much. We may laminate a little bit on here to thicken up the grip area, but we are not going to thin down the handle and have a arrow rest or any of that sort of thing going on, because it just would not, it doesn't have the length to it to accommodate that type of design. So we're going to see what we can scrape out of this bow, or this piece of wood. See if we can't get ourselves into a 40-pound class bow, full draw at 28 inches, and go from there. All right, so that is going to be the plan for this particular bow. This might provide a little better view of the grain orientation that I was talking about. And so you can see how you can take a grain line and basically follow it down the entire length of the board. And it may meander a little bit here and there. And I'm not sure that I mentioned this before, but this is a hickory board. Okay, and it runs off right here. And so we go 99% of the way down that board without ever losing the grain on it. And so that is a very quick way to tell if you're dealing with some pretty well-oriented stuff. And then if we get on this edge, and this is a little tougher to see, but if we start this growth ring right here and we start following it down, it just runs parallel with the edge of the board here. As you run along, it dives down just barely right here, comes back up toward the face of the board, continues on, and now it kind of starts making its way to the center and finishes out right at the bottom of this edge. And so where we start at the top here, it meanders through the board and finishes out at the bottom without ever leaving the confines of a 1/2 inch width of wood. Okay, now this is something you can definitely get away with hickory. Hickory can handle being violated on a few rings, but not so much maybe. This would still be a great board if it was a red oak or any other variety for that matter. But in hickory, it makes it a very, like I said, that is an A minus board for doing what we need to do because of its length. All right, so there we go. I have my layout drawn out on the board here, and you can see that this tip is kind of residing toward this side of the bow or board on this end, and when we go to the far end, kind of a similar scenario. It's residing on that side of the board. If we get this up against the straight edge, you will see that there is a gap here. So this board is bowed in the wrong direction. It's not bending the way we want it to bend, but is actually taking a bit of a sweep like this. And so used a straight edge here, but I'll put a notification, but a card in on the video here, so just kind of look up to the right hand side of the screen. It'll link you to a video that I talk about how to get a straight layout out of a crooked board, so I don't have to spend too much time dealing with that here. This is the method that I use, just along a straight edge. I measured out my centers, etc. So we are straight limbs for the first, here's the center of the bow. I've got the first 8 inches on both sides laid out full width, 1.5 inches, and then very slowly tapering, just kind of a sweeping taper down to 5/8 inch tips down here, which gives me enough room to kind of wiggle the tips to straighten them out should they not line up. And we'll try and get those tips as thin as possible, at least to 1/2 inch, if not more so, in the end result. And the idea here is to keep the thickness at our tips as thick as possible so we can get them real narrow. And the idea is to really eliminate the amount of mass out at the tips of the bow, since we don't have very much mass built into the center of it here. So we've got to manage that pretty carefully. There's going to be a lot of parts about this bow that are going to be very specific to the fact that its length is short. So where I ordinarily come down 1 inch on the tips to put in my nocks, I will only be coming down 3/4 of an inch on each side to only lose 1.5 inches, which would make this a 61-inch bow nock to nock. And hopefully we can make this work on 61 inches. We may find ourselves a little light. We may find ourselves at something more along the lines of a 26 or 27-inch draw comfortably. We may be halfway through this thing and decide that backing it with bamboo would be the right thing to do. This would also be a scenario where sinew backing would probably be a great option as we start to really thin down this piece of wood so that it can bend, and then the sinew can kind of add back some of that tension and weight. But I don't know which way we would go if we have to back it. My goal here is to leave it backed with thin air. All right, guys, here's how it looks from the tip, looking down the length of that cutout. Got a little bit of setback there. Kind of take a look at the way it's bending here a little bit. Not a lot, but it has some flex. So we're already getting some bend in that bow. And at this point we start the reduction process, and we'll reconvene next week and start with how we're going to reduce the belly on this and get it bending a little more evenly.